This is week 8 of the spring trimester of 2017. I'm Jennifer Marie, and this is my Atelier diary. Summer workshop happening at my Atelier in Chicago. My instructor Magda will be teaching it, and I'm going to be assisting her. It's a 2-part workshop. You can take one or both of them. It starts off with a 2-week drawing workshop and then a 4-week painting workshop. The drawing workshop is going to be showing you the steps on how to develop a drawing, and everyone will be doing a master copy. And then painting, it's about how to develop a figure painting, and then so they'll be working from a figure painting from life. I have more information about it in the description box down below. Also, my email is there, so if you have any questions or you want to register, make sure you email me. And for my figure painting, I feel like I'm having a lot of trouble with this figure painting, and this week was a struggle getting things done that I wanted to get done for it. So on Monday, what I did was I worked on keying up the lights to get Delon to be as bright as he looks. He's standing under a skylight and his chest is getting so much light that his chest is just blasted out with light. So I'm running into the problem with adding more white into my mixture, so he's starting to look pasty and not as colorful as he does appear. And I'll even be mixing up mixtures that I think are as colorful as I need it to be, and it looks really colorful on the painting, but then I step back and it doesn't look as colorful as I thought it did. So I'm just trying to find a balance of getting him bright, not pasty though, and more colorful. So I don't know, I'm having trouble definitely in that aspect. On Tuesday, I worked on the arm, bringing the arm that is raised in closer to him a bit more, shortening it a little bit. I also worked on the portrait a bit, trying to correct shapes. Still trying to key up the lights brighter and more colorful, still running into a problem with them getting kind of pasty looking. Also, I was working in the transitions in the stomach, specifically as the light turns, it starts going into the shadows that are around the stomach. Wednesday, I started working on the lower legs. So this whole week I've kind of started at the top and have been gradually working my way down the painting. Working on the legs it felt a lot easier because it's a more simple area of the painting, because I feel like I'm getting the colors and the values right in the legs, and I think that's because it's a bit easier because the legs are farther away from the light source, so they are a lot darker than, say, his chest or his stomach. So I don't need to be adding too much white in that to make it brighter anyway. So I like how the legs turn out because I don't get that pasty look that I'm struggling in the top portions of Delon's body. And also, I feel like I'm just getting the legs to blocking them in well, because I feel like I have enough information that I need in them, but it's still really simple. And the feet, I moved the feet around a bit, and I was even moving the structure of the legs around a bit as well to try and get the drawing of Delon more solid. So I like how the legs turned out, but the feet I'm still working on them and working on the shapes. I like how I changed the shapes and corrected them a lot, but it's still not there. I need to tighten them up a bit before I'll be happy with them. Okay, so once I got done with the legs, I started moving then up the painting. So I was working on the stomach of Delon, and I find it really challenging, like I've been saying, trying to get it to look as bright as it does, but also not pasty. And so I'm working back and forth from the shadow up into the light and the light down into the shadow and working back and forth that way. But I feel, I guess I don't even know quite how to explain it. The painting technique got really sloppy there, and I feel like how I'm moving the paint around too, like white got in the shadows and maybe too much black got in the light areas. So the lights are looking muddy, and then the shadows are looking kind of cloudy, which isn't a good look. So I don't know, I'm at the stomach area and the chest area, I'm just finding it's super hard to control the paint to try and get the transitions that I want. I think one of the main problems, or one of the reasons why I'm having a lot of issues with getting the lighter areas to not look pasty, and I'm trying to push the color as well, but it's just looking sloppy. I think it's because this week has been really sunny, and it's counterintuitive, but cloudy days are actually the best to paint if you're painting under natural light, because everything looks brighter and way more colorful. And especially on Delon, I've seen him where the cloud will go over the sun and he just glows this really colorful, really ochre colors. And then when the sun's out, everything's a lot dimmer and a lot grayer. And since I've seen short parts of him where he is under the cloud covering, I want to capture those colors. But this week, pretty much, it's been just sunny days. And so I think I haven't been painting from nature, and I'm trying to make up these colorful, cloudy days that I saw once before with him. So I think that might be part of it, because I think if I would tone down the colors and get them a little bit more gray, then maybe I can get it to look more naturalistic without trying to because I feel like it's either too pasty, or if I'm trying to push the color, it looks artificial or out of place. So I think come this next week, I'm gonna mix my palette up more from the colors that I'm actually seeing in nature. And then on Thursday, I worked on the arms. I felt like they were the farthest thing from nature. They were left pretty far behind. So I was working on the arms, and Matt was giving me a critique that day, saying that he wasn't liking the technique of how things looked like in the stomach area, like what I talked about. That was happening Wednesday, and when I was going in the arms, well, I was explaining to him too that I'm just having a really hard time controlling the paint, and he was saying that if I'm correcting things, I need to be making it look more naturalistic so I can actually see what I'm doing. So what I started doing then was, instead of just laying paint down, I would put paint down and then take a brush that was clean, and I would kind of scrub the paint out a little bit that I had, so it was like dry brushing paint around. So some layers or some parts of the painting I would have thicker paint, but other parts I would kind of blend out into something that I already had. And doing that, I was a lot more in control of what I was doing. And so I think I need to be doing that more, maybe not applying a ton of paint everywhere if I feel like I can't then control all that paint, especially in more complicated areas. So definitely dry brushing was helping me get control of the painting again. On Friday, I felt like the farthest thing from nature was then Delon's chest. So I started working in the shadow shape of his chest, the shadow that goes under his pecs, and I first thought that they were too high up, so I moved them down, and then I felt like they were too far down, so I started to move them back up. So I felt like I found this happy medium of where they should be and where it makes sense for the shadow shape of them to be. And I'm being really careful with the shadow shape and then the dark halftone as it transitions out into the light, trying to make that look as naturalistic as I can. And I was also then working in the lights of the chest. I then started working on the shadow line of the stomach and the transitions as it goes out from the stomach. And Magda told me to then start working on painting the lights in the stomach. So I started doing that as well. And I don't know. I feel like every time I work on it, I get an area a little bit better, but I feel like I usually make more strides in a week for a painting. And I just feel like I'm taking a long time to get a block in for it, and the block in is still looking pretty messy and sloppy. So I'm finding this painting really challenging. So hopefully next week I can start to get this painting moving in a better direction. And for my cast painting, I finished my cast painting this week. Super excited, really, really happy about it. So my goal was to get this cast painting done on Wednesday because was a scholarship that I was trying to submit this painting for. It's the Art Renewal Center, and if you haven't checked out that website, artrenewalcenter.com, I'll put a link in the description box below. It's a really good website, really good resource for representational painters. But my goal was to get it done on Wednesday, and I didn't do that because I worked on it till Friday. But I feel like it was in a really good place on Wednesday, so that's fine. So I was pretty much going around trying to get everything done with it this week. I repainted hands, paint chips. Oh, the paint chips that are on the bottom of the cast. So I was having problems with those paint chips because they would either get too linear when I was working in that area, and so if everything being kind of outlined in that linear way for the paint chips was, I felt like taking away from the focal point, because it's so far down at the bottom of the painting, and so I don't want to draw too much attention to it. But there are paint chips there, and I want them to look like paint chips. So I asked Matt to show me what I should do, and he showed me how to glaze over the paint chips. So what he did was he mixed up this dark grayish color and glazed over the part, and was showing me with the palette knife. I have a small palette knife, so the knife part of it's probably that big. It's pretty small. But he would take it and he would start scraping down the painting so it was pulling up some of the paint, but then the glaze that was in the crevices of the canvas would stay in. So it gave it this nice, it almost, the texture of it looked like the imprimatura, which was really interesting. And then he was showing me how I could take my palette knife and mix up the colors that I'm going to be using to make the paint chips and apply it in the areas of the paint chips and adding and subtracting from that. So he would put some on and then he would scrape it off. And it was getting this really interesting effect with it. So then he showed me what he needed to, so then I was doing it, and I just was having so much fun scraping around with the palette knife. And I'd scrape off everything, like all of the paint chips, and then I would start applying more things or more paint. And if it got too much contrast in that area, I would carefully scrape down so I wouldn't take up all of the paint, but it would kind of unify the area just by scraping everything down. So I could still see the lines. I could still see the lines of the paint chips and the different forms of the paint chips, but taking my palette knife and scraping it just down it, it unified it in a really interesting way. So I was having a lot of fun messing around with the palette knife. So I did that, and then I started to apply that texture in other places. So two parts of the painting that I wasn't the biggest fan of because I thought they were kind of, when you got up close to the painting, I thought they were kind of boring areas and they didn't give a lot back to the viewer. So I wanted to make them more interesting. So the two parts that I don't like are the two corners of the cast on the top two corners. And so I took my palette knife, and those areas were dry. At least I thought they were dry. But I took my palette knife and I was scraping it into the canvas as hard as I could, and it was pulling up paint that it was dry but not dry. It was kind of like this thick, sticky stuff that would get on my palette knife that I'd have to really take a paper towel and pull it off my palette knife. But I was scraping down these areas and exposing paint areas underneath, and then also taking my palette knife and applying paint on with the palette knife and scraping back over that and going back and forth, making these really interesting textures that I really liked. And then also, stepping back from the painting, I like how there's a lot of sweeping light movements that go across the whole cast. And I know when I'm drawing, if I were to see that, I would take either my fan brush or a kneaded eraser, and I would lightly either take the fan brush or the kneaded eraser over huge parts of the drawing and would get these sweeping light effects. And so I thought, since I'm getting interesting textures by taking paint off, and the layers that were beneath the top layer of paint were lighter. So what I did was I took my palette knife and I would scrape over the background and even over painted form, so it kind of didn't matter what area of the painting it was. If I was starting to go over a shoulder or an arm, if I saw light move across it, I would take my palette knife and mimic what the light was doing, and I would scrape really hard to get the paint to move out. So I was lighting up those areas, so it was kind of like erasing, like you're creating a lighter value. And it was just looking really interesting, and I was having a lot of fun with that, because thinking of painting, I think of it more as you keep adding paint on, but then it's fun too to use the palette knife to be making it like a subtractive thing and just go back and forth that way. Okay, and then when I was feeling like I was wrapping up this painting, Magda told me to stand in my spot and look at the actual cast and pretend it was my painting, and to be really impressed that, wow, I painted this and it looks so lifelike. And then to look at my actual painting and to see if my painting is holding up, or if it's a disappointment, then to look at it like, oh, I guess I didn't really get that effect that I'm seeing in life. And to do that with areas all around the cast and areas all around my painting. And that was really helpful and a good idea, just like a mental trick, to something to think about when you're finishing up a painting. But then doing that, I can look at my cast and look at my painting, and then I can see a whole bunch of differences. Like, I didn't put that exact chip in, or there's paint scraped across the cast that I don't quite have those shapes of paint scraped across the cast in my painting. And so I was asking Magda to explain, like, how do you finish up a painting, because you could work on it forever and just make it a complete scan of the thing that you're looking at. And she was saying that it's not so much about making an absolute perfect copy, but to look at my painting and make sure that everything looks like the texture of what it is. So like the texture of plaster, the texture of the different kind of plaster that the cast is hanging on, and then get away from texture and look at the form and make sure that all the forms are making sense, like the arm is in front of the stomach, and also that you could tap on everything and it would be a solid form and not like a cottony texture that your finger would go through. And she also said to just look at the painting and get a chair and sit in front of it from the viewing point that a normal person would look at viewing the painting, and really scrutinize and look at every single area and pretend that you're looking at it that's hanging in a gallery wall or something like that, where you can't fix it anymore. And if any part bugs you, then fix that, because it's kind of like your last chance to work on it. And I really like that, because I feel like you could work on paintings forever, but thinking more about just making sure that your painting has the proper space, atmosphere, and clarity, and when all three of those hold up, then you're done and you can be satisfied with it. But now I'm officially done with my cast. I feel really good about it. I'm done with the cast program at Ravenswood. I feel pretty exhausted, and the cast kind of burnt me out a little bit. It was a big project, so I'm really happy to be done with it and to move on to the next part of Ravenswood, which is working in still lifes. So my next project is called the Pear Project, which it's a memory exercise, and a pear like fruit, like an apple, but a pear. So I'll talk about that next week. Hopefully that goes well. And then for the extras during this week, on Monday I didn't get to do the portrait thing because I was working on my cast and I lost track of time, and by the time I was finished working on my cast that day, there was only 15 more minutes to the portrait class, so I just gonna wait till next week to do another one. And then Tuesday evening, this is the drawing that I did of Larry.